Hello, everyone, and welcome to EduMatch. Thank you so much for tuning in. So I'm super excited because today we get to speak with one of my good friends, Jason Green. Hey, Jason, how you doing?
Doing fantastic. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for being here. So I'm going to tell our viewers a little bit about you. So Jason was inspired by his youth development and nonprofit work as a student at Morehouse College, and he's been dedicated to his career to creating positive change in education. Co-founder of LINC, which stands for Learning Innovation Catalyst, and co-author of the best-selling book Blended Learning in Action, Jason has helped hundreds of schools and districts reimagine and implement 21st century teaching and learning. Through an ongoing research partnership with Stanford University Graduate School of Education's Dr. Arnitha Ball, Jason develops and implements professional learning experiences designed to help educators build their practice of blended and personalized learning. Jason holds an MBA from the Wharton School, an MSED from the University of Pennsylvania, and has spoken at leading universities and conferences around the world. So that is awesome, Jason. So tell us, we heard a little bit about your background, but tell us a little more and what inspired you to go into education.
Yeah, definitely. So my education journey, it happened pretty early in my career. I've been in education actually my whole career, but that's not what I set out to do when I first went to college. I was actually on my way to becoming a lawyer, and I wanted to become an environmental lawyer, energy lawyer, and around junior year, I began to do some mentoring and volunteering at a neighborhood high school. And what many people don't know, Morehouse College is located in one of the more kind of under-resourced communities in Atlanta. And so when I would literally cross the street, just about leaving Morehouse College, a place where students are on their way to some of the best graduate schools, on their way to amazing opportunities and companies. And I would cross the street and I would see students that looked just like us, but have the opposite trajectory. Students that were non-readers in high school, students that were really on a very different path. And around that time at Morehouse, I just began to question what was different about us on campus at Morehouse, at Spelman, Clark Atlanta, et cetera. What was different about us versus the students that were across the street? And the only thing that I could identify, it wasn't that we were smarter, more deserving, more skilled, more talented. It was just that at some point in our life, we got access to a good education. And for most of us, got access to a teacher that cared about us, that loved us enough to say, you can do it. And it was in those moments around junior year that I said, that just doesn't sit well with me. And I wanted to really work in the space of education, youth development, and really supporting the students who needed it the most. And so I decided after Morehouse to become a motivational speaker. I worked for 2 years in some of the most challenged areas throughout Atlanta, and pretty quickly also found out that motivation just also wasn't enough. I really wanted to understand pedagogy. I wanted to understand instruction. And so that's when I decided to go back and really focus my graduate work, both in business, because I wanted to understand scale and innovation, but I also wanted to really understand pedagogy. So I did my education master's with to really get an understanding of how do you reach the hardest to reach students? And how do you really look and reflect on classrooms in a way that if a student is not responding to a traditional classroom, what are some of the ways in which we can change that classroom environment to better reach those students? And so that's how I got into education, and that's really been my passion and mission ever since. From there, are we back?
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I've been having some technical difficulties with my internet, but hopefully you can hear me and see me okay?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So sorry about that glitch, but yeah, so I was really, really digging what you said and just your whole experience. So So, and I will go back once, you know, once we're done recording this to hear everything. So I know that it was the end of what you said was also equally compelling. So sorry, got cut off. But what is in education, and what drives them? Like you were telling this really passionate and amazing story about your experience at Morehouse and how that was transformational for you. Now that you're in education, and what topics specifically?
Yeah. So my work really started, as I mentioned earlier, really with a focus on reaching the hardest to reach students. I wanted to go into schools that were, in many cases, low performing, to areas and communities that were under-resourced. And when I got there, what we found was that if you change the environment in which a student was learning, and what I mean by that very specifically was, for many students, the traditional classroom setup of teacher lecturing the students, it really doesn't work for many of us. But then as you begin to shift more of the learning to the student, and that might be through projects-based learning, through peer-to-peer learning, through inquiry-based learning, through all these different other modes of learning, what we found was that the students really actually transformed as learners. They got more engaged in the learning experience. They became more owners of their own learning process. And it wasn't that they became new people, it was just the environment shifted. And after doing that work and having a chance to do this in districts all over the country, I had the amazing opportunity to work in districts from over the last 15 years, from New York City to Miami to Chicago to Oakland, all over the country. And invariably, when that shift was able to happen in the classroom, students responded to it. And what we found was that the shift actually wasn't the hardest with the students, it was with the teachers. And so where my focus really has now gone to over the last 6 years, and we'll talk about it shortly, into the research partnership that we have with Stanford University, is really now in the world of teachers and teacher development. And it's beyond the work of just understanding technology and how students and teachers interact with technology, but it's actually in the world of how do you shift the mindset of a teacher to, in many ways, not just see their students differently, but even and especially see themselves differently in a classroom. And what we think about is having a teacher not see themselves as, let's say, a lecturer first, or as an information giver first, but actually as a facilitator first, as a creator of experiences first, as a relationship builder first. And when a teacher actually shifts in their mind state and their mindset around that, that's when you can start to really do incredible things with technology and with these other now things that are available in classrooms. And so what really drives my work and has driven me is, if we can reach the teachers and inspire them in a way to see themselves differently, then we have a chance to have an exponentially greater effect, not just on number of students, but the depth that we can have in how students also see themselves as learners.
Wow, that's powerful. That is powerful. I was just having a conversation a couple of days ago with some people about the ISTE standards, and how the ISTE teacher standards kind of have a trickle-down effect for the student standards. Like, the goal is to arrive at the student standards, so the teacher standards are like a way to, you know, to support that, to support our students in that learning process. Yeah, so that is awesome. So, so what inspired you to write Blended Learning in Action? If you could tell us a little bit about your book.
Absolutely. So that book was such an exciting project for me to take on. I have two amazing co-authors, Catlin Tucker, who is one of the most innovative and well-known blended learning teachers in the country. She started her blended learning class with, like almost no technology, like one iPad, and figured out that it really wasn't about the technology first. It was about her mindset and student mindset. and my other co-author, who's now one of my partners with Link, Tiffany Wyckoff, who also has been an incredible trailblazer in the work of student-centered learning, and has been a teacher, a school leader, and has now led a tremendous amount of our work, particularly in our virtual platform. But I've had this amazing opportunity to work with two educators that really, really have pushed the practice. And what inspired us to do this work was, it was a couple things. It was looking out in the kind of the world of blended learning and personalized learning. And what we saw was, it was two things. One, there were several districts that were starting to make big investments in technology, both large districts, small districts, medium-sized districts, didn't matter. But districts were beginning to make large investments in technology, and almost without fail, they were struggling with how teachers were kind of the teacher uptick or teacher uptake with regard to using the technology to the highest benefit, instructional benefit. And we saw this over and over and over again. I mean, you had the very high profile districts like Los Angeles Unified that attempted a one-to-one rollout. And within months, they were pulling the devices back out of classrooms. But that was just the one that got front page news. But this was happening all over the country. And so we knew that there was a real missing piece in this, what is possible with technology to what was actually happening in classrooms and in schools. And so the first piece was, there was just a huge need and a real pain point that districts were having. But the second thing was, when we looked at many of the books that had already been written about blended learning, there's some great books out there, but most of them either focus directly on, classroom practice, very focused on teachers, or they focus, let's say, on more theory, or system-wide change, which might be better for researchers or for superintendents or folks at the central office. But we weren't able to find many books that really were able to tell the story of how transformation happens and must happen at the classroom level, the school level, and ultimately the district level. And so when the three of us came together and began to conceptualize the book, we said, we want to create something that educators across the board can use. And so that's how the three parts of the book came about. The first part, which I focused on, was more around system-wide change and really understanding professional learning at the adult level, really understanding the readiness of a school to go through a 21st century learning transformation. And the second part focus kind of at the instructional components around assessments and digital tools and things that a school might want to consider as they're rolling out a digital initiative. And the third part of the book focused on blended learning models, station rotation, whole group rotation, playlist. And what we wanted to do in that portion was provide some very, very tangible classroom guidance for teachers in how to implement a very highly effective blended classroom. And so ultimately what the book became, and we're so excited because it's now a best-selling book with over, it's almost at this point, over 15,000 readers that are actually taking advantage of the book. And it's across the board. It's teachers, it's principals, it's superintendents, it's teacher coaches. It's all these different educators that have found that the way that you actually achieve transformation is that you have to operate at multiple levels: classroom, school, and ultimately at the district and system-wide level.
Yes, absolutely. So it takes stakeholders at all levels to make a change.
It really does. And I didn't even mention, and this is actually at the center of it, is ultimately what it takes is the adults have to set a different model for how learning actually takes place, because that's what the students are going to need as they move into a very different world than quite honestly what most of us have experienced. And so the way that we think about this is that the adults have to be, first and foremost, the lead learners. And they have to model what we call a generative learning process, where they're constantly looking at their growth, constantly reflecting, constantly iterating on what works, what doesn't work, trying new things, taking risks. And that's really the way that we see adults really at this point needing to be an example for students.
Absolutely. So it's crucial for us to be lifelong learners and setting that example for our students.
Yeah.
So absolutely. All right. So in terms of like your more of your current work, you've shared that you've been involved in an ongoing research partnership with Stanford University. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. That is the most exciting. This is the most exciting thing that I've been part of in my professional career. Has been this research partnership with Dr. Arnitha Ball, who's an endowed chair professor at Stanford's Graduate School of Education. Dr. Ball has been a teacher, a professor, a researcher. She's now dedicated her work over especially the last 20 years, also very much in the area of teacher development. And she's created what she now calls the model of generative change. And the thing that was really intriguing for Dr. Ball was that most teacher professional development programs and most teacher professional development in school systems really is inadequate when you think about preparing teachers for 21st century classrooms. And 21st century classrooms, when she first began looking at it, it was looking at classrooms that were highly culturally diverse, multilingual, students that were coming from all different kinds of backgrounds, socioeconomic, and in many cases, teachers that were not coming from those same backgrounds. And so now essentially you're putting somebody into a classroom that for all intents and purposes may not know those students. And now you're asking that person to do something which is a very difficult task, and that is not just build relationships, but be the learner that actually guides those students through their learning process, right? And I use that word very specifically, be the learner first. And what she found was that in most cases, teacher development programs were really not preparing teachers for that experience. So Dr. Ball spent a number of years, similar to myself, where she looked at where were the most challenged environments where this was happening. She went to Australia and looked at environments where teachers were working with Aborigine populations, New Zealand, where in the Maori populations, post-apartheid South Africa, and all over the US, because she wanted to find examples of places where there were marginalized populations and then teachers that were working with those populations that chances are were not from those populations. And that's why she chose very specifically those environments. And what she found from her work was, and what she developed from her work, was this model of generative change. And the reason why this is so powerful is it really dissects how and why, number one, transformation within professional learning doesn't usually happen. And the reason why is because, as she describes it, in most PD, teachers are viewed as objects of change, not as agents of change. And so in essence, there's no real empowerment that the teacher experiences, right? Like there's no situation where somebody that's viewing themselves and is treated as an object actually go through transformation. And so she really began with this idea of how do we help teachers see themselves as agents of change? And so the model of generative change is a model in which it starts with a phase which essentially is a phase of metacognitive awareness. And what that basically means is somebody has to take a deep reflection of themselves, of how and why they operate the way that they do. Why do they teach the way that they do? Why did they set their classroom the way that they did? What were the things that informed their current operation? And if they can first, with an understanding of metacognitive awareness, move to the second phase, which is called ideological becoming, and that comes from the research of Bakhtin. And what ideological becoming basically said was, how can we help a teacher now see themselves differently and see the classroom and their students differently? It's creating new ideologies. This is, I used the example earlier of a teacher moving from I see myself as a lecturer, to I see myself as a creator of experiences, right? That's a new becoming, a new way of thinking about yourself. And then the third phase is a phase that is termed internalization. And essentially, that's the phase where this new becoming, these new ideas actually become part of that person's new practice. It becomes part of how they actually operate. And what we know is that in many transformation or change processes, people may try something new. Chances are it doesn't work the first couple of times, then they slip back into what they used to be, right? And so this process of internalization is so critical because this is what becomes the thing that allows a teacher to really build this new practice into their practice. It's like the new behavior is really forming itself. And Dr. Ball uses in that process of internalization action research, and having a teacher really view themselves as themselves in their classroom in a process of ongoing action research. And then the final process is what she calls essentially generativity. And this is where if you go through the first phase of metacognitive awareness, ideological becoming, into internalization, then you can move to a new phase of generativity. And this is where somebody becomes an ongoing learner, an ongoing changer, an ongoing reflecting and iterating on their practice. The term that she often uses is a pedagogical problem solver. And really have teachers view themselves as, it doesn't matter what's going on in my classroom, I am working to figure out how to reach each one of my students. And it's been such powerful work because now what we've done in this partnership with her is now really taken a very different view of what does professional development actually need to look like to actually create the transformation that schools are up against right now.
Wow. Okay. I love that model. That's very, very inclusive. And the one of the things that you said that really stuck out to me was as teachers being treated as agents of change instead of objects. So yeah. I love that. Yeah, that was definitely a gold nugget from that. So, all right. So tell us a little bit about LINC, if you could. Yeah. Like, what exactly is LINC, and what's the history behind it?
Absolutely. So LINC stands for Learning Innovation Catalyst, and not surprisingly, we've really taken on the first challenge that I brought up, which was school systems realizing they need to change, buying a bunch of stuff, investing in a bunch of stuff, then realizing that it's much harder to shift a classroom than just buying a smartboard or buying devices. So what LINC is really up to is recognizing that what's the hardest and heaviest lift that schools are up to is actually a change of mindset, which then leads to a change of behavior and ultimately a new culture. And so the work of LINC is really in the world of mindset shift, behavior shift, and ultimately culture shift. What we've learned is that this is not easy work, right? Like, this is the hard work. It's easy to buy a bunch of devices. It's easy to buy digital curriculum. It's much harder to shift how somebody views themselves in a classroom. The great news for LINC is that, as I've just described, we have this head start because Dr. Ball has been thinking about this for the last 20 years in what does real transformation look like. And so what LINC does is we're now partnered with school districts, both in the US, throughout the US. We also have some schools down in South America and Colombia. And what we're really doing is working directly with both school leadership teams, as well as working directly with teachers. And we don't prescribe any specific curriculum. We don't prescribe any specific model. We don't prescribe any specific, you have to do this, this, and this. What we do is really support school leadership in, this is how you implement a culture transformation. And for the teachers, what we do is we help them actually learn both the mindset and also the practices of a 21st century classroom. And when we think about a 21st century classroom, what really drives us is shifting more of the learning from the teacher to the student. So in essence, you're creating a student-centered environment. You're creating an environment where students have more agency, have more control, have more ownership over their learning process. And so in essence, our work is in the world of that shifting of ownership in the classroom from teacher to student. And the way that we do that is we use a framework, which is actually referenced in our book, which we call the PAC. And the PAC stands for personalization, agency, authentic audience, connectivity, and creativity. And we essentially help teachers start to re-envision their lessons and lesson plans and classroom environments around the PAC, in which all of those hallmarks, we call them like the hallmarks of the 21st century classroom, really drive towards student-centered learning. And what we've done is we've actually built a virtual platform. It's one of the most cutting-edge virtual platforms that's out there. That's not an online PD or online course. We've learned that most online courses actually don't end up shifting practice or creating transformation. But what we've created is, based in Dr. Ball's research, is a virtual platform that guides teachers through a very job-embedded approach to professional development and ultimately to creating new practices in the classroom.
Wow, that is fantastic. There's a question on the YouTube live chat from Marvia. She was asking if there's a link to the resources that you mentioned. So how can everyone check that out online? Yeah,
definitely. So it's pretty easy. So we have some of the resources at our website, which is www.linc.education. So it's link.education, spelled all the way out. And link again is LINC.education. So there's a lot of these resources are on our website. For folks that want to go deeper into the research, I'm actually happy to share with you, Sarah, a link to some of Dr. Ball's seminal papers and research. But if folks want to see it sooner, you can actually Google Dr. Arnetha Ball, and that's B as in boy, A-L-L. And to make it even easier, you can Google her name and the model of generative change. And what you'll actually find is a tremendous amount of her work, her research around the work that I've been referencing.
Sweet, sweet. So that is excellent. So definitely take a look out for that. So Marvia says thank you. And great. So what can we expect to see from you and from LINC in the near future?
Yeah, so we are out to change the world. We are out to change the face of education. Even today, when we go into schools and still see students, even if they're on devices, in a passive mode of learning, what we know is that this will not prepare them for their inevitable world. Sometimes I use this stat in many of my presentations and workshops, saying that today's student, today's learner, is likely going to have 11 or more jobs between the ages of 18 and 48. They're going to probably have to reinvent themselves multiple times over, because of technology. So we're in the world now where today's students are going to have to be generative learners just to even exist in many ways in the workforce. And so what LINC is up to is, in an urgent way, is really supporting the shift of classrooms and of schools to moving from passive learning environments, even for that matter, the compliance learning environments, to a really engaged, student-driven, student-owned classrooms. And so what's taking place is folks can expect from LINC that we are at the forefront of this work. We've created, as I mentioned, a methodology and a virtual platform and coaching methodology that really supports this research and supports the transformation process. We're working in a number of districts, as I mentioned, in the U.S. and in South America. And we're at the point now where we're saying this change needs to happen. It needs to happen immediately. And so from Link, folks can keep a real eye out for us really supporting this vision and working with innovative school systems and innovative educators who are really ready to turn learning over to students, and honestly, and really working with us to help support that process.
Oh, that is wonderful. So I'm excited to see what you all have on the horizon. So, so thank you again for coming on and sharing all of this great insight with us and telling us about the great work that you're doing. So just wanted to turn it back over to you for any last words and also how people can get in contact with you online.
Absolutely. So number one, I want to thank you, Sarah, so much for having me on. It's always great to connect with you. We are hiring. We're looking for coaches and innovative educators that want to be part of this mission. So if folks may be interested in potentially learning more about Link and even joining the team, also www.link.education. So definitely welcome folks who have been inspired by this. And if you want to connect with me further, I am on Twitter at Jason Todd Green. That's all one full word, my full name, Jason Todd Green on Twitter. We actually do kind of an ongoing book chat where we follow the book and we do a question each day. And we're helping folks build their PLN and build their practice through this book study that we facilitate. So would love to connect with folks and really just have folks understand how we can transform learning by really supporting mindset shifts and ultimately supporting culture shifts in our schools and our districts.
Sweet. Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much again for your time and for all of your great insight that you shared with us today. Wanted to thank everyone for tuning in, and this conversation will be it's available on YouTube now. We're also going to rebroadcast it on Facebook and put it out as a podcast. So it should be coming up in 4 Tuesdays, 6 a.m. that Tuesday morning, 4 weeks from now. So definitely look for that. But in the meantime, tell your friends this awesome interview is available on the YouTube channel right now. So next week, we are going to be doing a tweet and talk 6 p.m. Eastern time. So just we are going to be talking about community building. So if anyone is interested and available to be on panel, go to podcastwithanS.edumatch.org/sign up and to watch podcastwithanS.edumatch.org/tweet talk. So if you enjoyed this, then please subscribe. Give us some love on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. So thank you all so much and have a wonderful, wonderful week.